When you study the historical records, personal field notes, and the small details often buried in after-action reports, one thing becomes clear. Water scarcity shaped the daily reality of countless WWII soldiers more than most documentaries ever admit. Frontline units routinely found themselves in landscapes where every well was contaminated, sabotaged, dried up, or deliberately poisoned. Whole divisions moved not because of enemy fire, but because the water table failed them. And before we dive in, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you never miss a deep dive into the lesser-told survival methods that shaped real wartime endurance. These aren't theories. They're field-tested tactics men depended on when the usual sources disappeared. Let's get straight to the meat of it. Below are 8 water hacks WWII soldiers relied on when wells turned to dust, and more importantly, how you can still apply them today in real-world situations, whether you're off-grid, hiking, or simply building your own resilience library. Soldiers use soil distillation pits to pull moisture from the ground itself. In North Africa and parts of Eastern Europe, units stuck in devastated terrain were trained to create simple solar distillation pits. Even when the ground looked dead and powder dry, digging a pit roughly a metre deep and placing a collecting cup at the centre allowed trapped moisture in the soil to evaporate under the heat of the sun. A sheet, usually canvas coated with wax, oiled cloth, or any waterproof fabric, was stretched over the opening and weighted so condensation dripped into the cup. It was slow, but it produced clean water in places where none was visible. You can replicate the same technique with a plastic sheet, a metal can, and a shovel during emergency situations. It's not a fast process, but it's dependable. And WWII records show that even in regions considered barren, soldiers could pull half a litre to a litre per day if the pit was positioned in slightly shaded or vegetated areas. Frontline troops collected water from morning condensation long before civilians learned the trick. Before dew harvesting became a modern prepper concept, soldiers sleeping under tarps or vehicle hoods learned to shake off collected condensation at dawn. Units in Italy, Algeria, and Burma sometimes gathered several canteen cups worth by wiping down their gear, helmets, tent walls, and even rifle slings with clean cloth and then wringing it out. The key to making this work today is surface area. Spread out tarps, smooth metal sheets, or even a poncho during the night, angled so dew forms heavily. In cool and humid environments, this method is still surprisingly effective. The trick is consistency. It's not a one-time miracle, but a daily routine. Units filtered muddy or stagnant water using layered cloth and improvised charcoal. During the Second World War, soldiers often carried filtration tablets, but honestly, there just weren't enough for every situation. When water sources turned foul, many relied on a 3-stage field filter. First, cloth to catch sediment, then sand for the finer particles, and finally charcoal to tackle chemical impurities. Charcoal was often scraped straight from burned firewood or leftover cooking pits. The end result wasn't perfect by modern standards, but it drastically improved safety, especially when boiling just wasn't possible. If you're setting up your own field system, you can replicate this with a metal container, punctured with tiny holes. Then layered with cloth, sand, and crushed charcoal. Follow it all up with boiling, and you've got a filtration method nearly identical to what kept soldiers alive in North Africa and the Pacific. Soldiers trapped in dense forests sometimes squeezed water from vines and certain tree barks. Troops trained for jungle warfare, especially in the Pacific, learned which vines and lianas would bleed safe, drinkable water. After cutting a vine near its root, they'd hold the cut end downward and collect the liquid as it dripped out. Some species offered clean hydration, while others were dangerous, so they relied heavily on both their training manuals and the experience of indigenous scouts. In a modern context, this is only practical if you've actually studied your local environment. But the core idea is still transferable. When wells and streams fail, vegetation often becomes the next best reservoir. Sap-heavy trees, such as birch, can be tapped in early spring, producing several litres per day with nothing more than a simple drilled hole and a tube. Patrols would trap rainwater using helmets, mess tins, and even ammunition boxes. When rainfall was expected, units laid out every concave object they had. Helmets lined with cloth, open mess tins, vehicle hoods, even upturned crates. A single good rainfall could refill several canteens. Soldiers commonly lined their steel helmets with a bandage to keep debris from collecting in the water. These days, the same concept applies, just with far greater efficiency. Set out buckets, tarps, and containers whenever rainfall is forecast. A clean tarp, staked into a funnel shape, can channel several litres into a single container in just a matter of minutes. Troops purified questionable water using heat stone boiling when metal pots were lost. When a pot was destroyed or left behind, soldiers heated stones in a fire and dropped them into wooden bowls, hollowed stumps, or even canvas buckets to bring the water to a boil. The stones must be dry, because wet stones can explode. This method allowed entire squads to purify water even with minimal gear. If you ever find yourself without a pot, a simple carved wooden bowl or a heavy leather container combined with fire-heated stones can accomplish the same thing. Soldiers dug seep wells beside rivers to avoid pathogens and fuel spills. Instead of drinking directly from a contaminated river, common near battle zones or vehicle crossings, soldiers dug small holes a few feet back from the water's edge. Clean water filtered naturally through the soil and filled the pit. This usually produced clearer, safer water, even though it still required boiling. You can use the same approach today when a lake or stream is visibly polluted or full of sediment. Dig your seep well, allow it to fill, skim the top, and then purify it. Units reused condensation from cooking and engine heat when conditions got desperate. In winter campaigns, soldiers placed metal cups near the exhaust of field stoves or vehicle engines to collect condensed steam. Any cooking pot with a lid provided the same opportunity. The steam condensed on the lid and dripped into waiting canteens. This technique works today with any covered boiling pot. Tilt the lid slightly and place a container beneath the drip line, and you're harvesting distilled water with no additional fuel cost. These 8 tactics aren't relics. They're practical systems of thinking that kept real soldiers alive when infrastructure collapsed. Apply them in your off-grid routines, practice them during camping or field work, and add them to your survival toolbox so they aren't lost to time. If you appreciate deep-cut historical survival knowledge like this, make sure you subscribe, share this guide with fellow enthusiasts, and help keep these forgotten techniques alive.